Connor here. Today we're going to be going over all of the mechanics that you need to know for your fundamental boxing. We're talking about the jab, cross, lead hook, lead uppercut, and rear uppercut. And we're going to be doing it in the easiest way possible that you can do anywhere, and all you need is a wall. So let's get into it, and you're going to see how simple it is to learn the mechanics for your boxing. So as always, Yasmin's going to be helping me demonstrate all of these concepts, techniques, drills, exercises, whatever you want to call it, with me today. So, right, like I mentioned, we're going to be using the wall for learning all of the mechanics today, and that's all we need, right? It's just a flat surface area on the side of our body, and it's going to show you all of the mistakes that you're potentially making and really rein you in for the techniques that we're going to be doing. So when we're using the wall, what's important to do is to make sure that you're tight up against it when we're doing these techniques, but not so much that you feel like you're stuffing yourself or all of the techniques are dragging against the wall. We're going to be using this not as a crutch, but as a guide. So it's going to help us tighten up those techniques, take all of the fat off of them, and just make them look as clean and mechanically sound as possible. And again, that's what we're working on, is the mechanics, what our body should be doing when we're throwing these techniques. So just to start, we're going to be going with the jab. So Yazzy's going to put her lead foot up against the wall, and she's going to be in her fighter stance right in front of me here. So Yazzy's going to have her lead foot up against the wall with her lead arm, obviously her left, on the same side. Again, not tight against the wall, but just a little bit of space between her shoulder, her elbow, and her hand here. And right away, right, we're going to feel very linear with this, like our arm is parallel with the wall and not tilted in like this, not turned out awkwardly, right in front of us, perfectly stacked fist over top of elbow. When we're throwing the jab here, and this goes for all of our punches in general, the power doesn't come from the arm. The arm is the communicator of the power that our body is creating. Okay, but we need to make sure that we have good structure on this technique so all of that power can come from our body into the actual technique and into landing on our opponent. So when she's doing this, she's going to take a little step with her lead foot, and as she does, she's going to extend her arms straight out, right down the length of the wall, finishing with her palm turned over just like this. Yazzie, can you pose on that for me? So she takes that step. Her arm is fully extended. She's keeping her rear elbow in, right? And she's trying to stay as linear as she possibly can with this. So as she brings it back, her fist and her hand will come back together, right? And let's see that again. Pose. She steps in, right? Her elbow is right down the length of the wall. And if you feel your elbow sort of smacking the wall before you throw the technique, this is exactly what I was talking about, of how it's going to rein us in and not allow us to come up like this before we throw it. And that's really what we're getting into altogether here, is we're taking the fat off of it, we're taking the telegraph off of it, and we're making these punches as efficient, consistent, and subtle as possible to make sure that these techniques are always going to be applied in the best way possible. Blah. Anyways, she's in her fighter stance. She throws that punch, boom, and brings it back, right? Not over rotating on it and making sure that we're protracting our shoulder to cover our chin when we're doing this technique. Let's do that again. Nice. And bring it back. Boom. Foot and hand paired together, right? Now, me as her coach, I'll tell her, aim at my face, right? So she has a very clear target. Go back, boom. Now don't touch this side. Throw it again. So she has to throw that punch right down the alley. Bring it back, again. Good, and back. Now throw it with a little bit of snap. Once you feel comfortable, right, pose on the finish, bring it back and pose. Pose on the finish, bring it back and pose. But now let's snap into it with the step all together. So you go, snap and then back. Boom, just like that. It's so linear, it's so efficient. She's able to stay consistent with that technique, and it's very hard to see me as her opponent when that punch is going to be coming. But let's get into the cross next. Okay, so now for doing the cross, it's going to be the exact same concept of trying to keep that punch as linear as possible, as efficient, as consistent, and as subtle as we can make it. All right, so her back foot is going to be up against the wall. She's going to be facing, right, again, down the length of the wall, because we want to feel how linear we can make this strike. So a lot of the time when people are throwing their crosses as beginners, they'll throw the strike and the punch will sort of trail its way inward like this, right? And that's their body trying to create this power, this torque from turning our shoulders, but we're not allowing our arm to open up with it and straightening out right down the length of the line, right? Instead, they keep it in front of their shoulders and they let it follow as they turn their body through. And you get this sort of awkward looping straight versus one that's extremely straight. So this is what we're using, again, the wall for. So where the power is coming from here, her back foot's gonna turn, her hip, her shoulder, all together and stay stacked over top of our feet while we do it. We don't want our chest to lead the way on this, where we find ourselves putting all of our weight onto our lead foot. We stay based in between our legs and we are gonna turn hard all the way through on it. So we're still stacked. I can feel my back foot, I can feel my front foot, and I'm balanced all the way turned through just like this. So when she's doing this technique, she pivots her back foot, her hip, her shoulder, and she's not leaning against the wall. She should have a little bit of space between it, and her shoulders are almost all the way turned through. So if I was to push her into the wall, her shoulders would hit flat against it. We don't want to finish off sort of half turned like this, where maybe only my side would be resting against the wall. I want you all the way through so you're practically parallel with the wall. This will feel maybe a little bit over exaggerated if you've never done it in this way before, but you're going to generate so much more power, range, and just strength and structure behind that punch if you're able to maintain this. Easier said than done, but that's why we're doing it with the wall. So her back foot turns, hip, shoulder, all together. Right? And again, she shouldn't be leaning against the wall. She should be balanced on her feet right here. All right, now look at that, right? She's finishing with a perfect punch directly in front of her face, right down the length of the wall, trying to follow that as smooth as she possibly can and not letting it trail off. So again, take it slow, boom, turning through, bring it back. Yes, and again, boom. Hold this stance, right? Make sure that heel's up, your ball of the foot's on the mat. Don't let me push you over. Right, and she should be, so we got to check that again. All right, take that stance. All right, pivot and turn, dig that back foot into the mat. All right, hip shouldn't be against the wall. Yeah, it's hard to keep yourself perfectly balanced when you're thinking through all the mechanics here. All right, don't let me push you over. Yes, and look, she can support basically my weight on the end of her fist because everything is stacked, right? From the back foot all the way through the hip, the shoulder, all together, where I can basically pose like this. And you can see that chain from fist into foot. And that's the structure we're trying to always keep when we're throwing this technique. So again, she throws it. I'm gonna hold my hand up, give her a little bit of an alleyway, aim at my face. Good, and bring it right back. Let's do that again. Nice, again. Boom, one more time. And it's really going to prevent us from lifting up our elbow and trying to jam that punch forward into our opponent, right? It's going to be so tight and concise. Also, when you're doing this technique, don't pull your shoulder back before you throw it. It should just be right from where it's sitting, snap into the technique and right back in, snap. All right, so I can start from a very steady and relaxed guard, explode into that punch and make sure it comes right back. Bang, bang. Right, there's very, very little and subtle movements to what we're doing right here. Okay, let's get into the lead hook now. Okay, so same concept applies now for when we're doing our lead hook. So Yazzie stands orthodox, which means that her lead foot is in front, or her left foot is her lead, right? And that means that her lead hook would be over top of that leg, right? To start, we need to figure out creating power for this strike. A lot of the time for boxers and kickboxers especially, our shoulders are very bladed. So that's one shoulder is quite in front of the other, right? To create power on this left hook, I need space to do it. If I don't have space, it's going to look very chippy, right? Or just throwing my arm at it and not utilizing the entire power of my shoulders, hips, and legs. The way that we're going to do that is Yazzie standing in her stance right here. She's going to load into her lead side. And what that means is that her left shoulder is going to get pulled behind her right. So just like that, left comes behind the right. I'm not just pulling the arm back and the wall won't allow me to do it. And that's the beautiful thing about this. Her elbows are staying in, her hips are turned, and she's bent into her legs, right? She feels some strength and power and balance out of these legs here. So from this position, she is loaded and ready to strike. Boom. Right? This is going to be a subtle telegraph, right? But if we want power and to figure out the mechanics of landing a very strong left hook, then we need to do this. So right? She loads into her left side, and with a simple turn of her shoulders, hips, and this lead foot raising off the mat, she can create all of the power into that strike. So for me, when it comes to pivoting the lead foot on our hooks, there's a lot of different ideas on that, right? It doesn't necessarily matter to do it as long as your hips and shoulders can turn. If you don't have the mobility to turn your hips and your shoulders without turning your foot, then you need to do that. But if you can do all of the mechanics and have such a subtle movement from that lead foot, then there's nothing wrong to that. So, right, do we need to pivot it? Do we not need to pivot it? It depends on you. Okay, so if it feels more comfortable to do it, then try to do it. You might bump into the wall a little bit, but just give yourself a hair more space. So again, she loads up against the wall, right? And then as she opens up, she's going to lift up that hook and throw it in the tightest way possible. And as we've mentioned before with all the other techniques, she's not going to have the opportunity to load and swing the arm open before she brings it in. That's a huge telegraph, a huge opening, and very, very easy to counter for your opponent if they can recognize that you're about to throw that hook. So we're keeping it super tight. She loads, right, and she turns off. Boom, with her fist, elbow, and shoulder all at the exact same height, and her shoulders turned through. She's not just throwing the arm across her chest like this. I know it's a lot of cues, but you're gonna feel every single thing that I'm mentioning here when you do this yourself against the wall. So she loads, she turns back, bang, right? One more time, she loads. She turns back, boom, right? And a simple cue that a coach can do for your partner here is they hold up their arm like this, and she needs to wrap around that with her left hook so her bicep hits my forearm here and brings it back. And this is so tight. I'll tighten in just so you can see it on the camera there, right? She goes back. Boom, right? She has maybe a foot of space where she can wrap that hook around. That is such a tight left hook that I can barely see before she throws it. And that's what's beautiful about throwing your technique in this way. Same thing again, pose around my arm. Boom, right? Stay there. Don't let me push you back. Right? Look at all that strength she has dug into the mat right here. Right? Her entire side of her body is tight and engaged behind that punch, unbreakable when it lands. Okay, let's get into the right hook now. Okay, so for learning the right hook now, a lot of people have trouble throwing the right hook because it feels so whippy. It feels like a haymaker punch that we're just sort of throwing from behind our back. Again, the wall will not allow us to do this. It's going to tighten us up and make sure we're throwing this punch with great efficiency. So she's in her fighter stance up against the wall, and all of the mechanics are the exact same for how we threw the cross earlier. The back foot turns, the hips, the shoulders, all in unison while staying stacked over top of our feet, and we open up that punch and let it wrap around with us. So our body is doing all of the work here. All we need to do is open it up like this. So as I turn, boom, I finish. All right, so let's see Yazzie do that. Right, she's loading with subtlety against the wall and turns her shoulders back into the strike. And again, she's balanced on her feet. She shouldn't be resting against the wall like that, right? And her arm is stacked right around to the side of her body here. So fist, elbow, and shoulder are all on the exact same plane. Let's bring that punch back in. All right, as she throws it, boom, yes, right? And she's balanced on her feet, right? And it shouldn't be super easy to knock her over. If I really gave her a shove, she would go, but in general, you should feel balanced here. All right, again, boom, yeah, very nice. And going back, try to stay stacked, right? Yes, right? So you don't want to feel yourself leaning over to the side with the strike, right over top of the legs when you do it. All right, let's do that one more time. Boom, yeah, there we go. Don't let me push you back. Right, she should feel strong in this position because if you were landing this strike, you want to be able to land it with it not collapsing as it hits its target. So same drill that we did earlier. I hold up my arm like this, and she needs to wrap her right hook around my forearm. And again, look how tight she can throw that. It's amazing. All right, when we're using the wall, how efficiently we can throw these strikes. Again, bang. All right, one more time. Bang, nice. Looks really, really good, and there's no fat on that technique. So a lot of time, especially with Muay Thai fighters, they find right hooks very awkward because they can't utilize their shoulders enough. They're standing quite square, and they end up just throwing their arms across like this. There's so much less power that we can or so much more power that we can generate by actually using our body efficiently with these strikes. But let's go over the uppercuts now, and then all done after that. Going over the lead uppercut. So Yazzie, again, is going to have her lead foot against the wall. Very similar mechanics to the left hook. She's going to load with her shoulders, her hips, and getting a little bit more into legs on this, right? We want to take all of the arm out of that strike. And in general, when we're throwing techniques, we don't want to bring our elbows behind our backs, right? That's a huge telegraph, a very big opening, and I can almost guarantee that the power of the strike will almost only come from your arm when you do something like that, right? You'll look very stiff, right? And just sort of whip the arm up there. There's no technique to that. Instead, while keeping my elbows in, I bend and load into my leg, and then I come back with it, turning my elbow up directly underneath my strike, and then I bring it straight back in. I load, shoot, back in. Load, shoot, back in, right? With lots of subtlety. So when she loads up against the wall here, feeling a little bit more legs, get into those legs. Yes, now as she turns back with that uppercut, throw it for me. Yes, she wants to make sure that she's balanced over top of her feet, not leaning against the wall. The right arm, rear arm stays in, and there's weight in both of her legs. She's not leaning forward, she's not leaning back, right? And trying to keep our balance as best we can. I kind of screwed with her there, but she loads up against the wall. Boom, throws back. Bang, what a beautiful uppercut. Right down the length of the wall. Don't let it trail off. It's not a shovel hook where it's taking an angle, scooping, and kind of trailing off to the side. Instead, we need to split it right up the middle as best as we can. So again, boom, yes, and right back in now. Don't pose. No, it's okay. Boom, yeah, love that. Boom, using her hips, her legs, her shoulders, and then finishing off with the power and strength from her arm, keeping that structure. Right, again. Yes, underneath my arm now, same drill that we did earlier. Here, I'll just do like this so you guys can see. All right, she needs to scoop and hit her bicep against my forearm there. All right, look at that drive upwards. And you shouldn't be pulling the arm in like you're trying to pull that arm towards you, right? That outstretched, pulling my forearm in towards her. You shouldn't feel that. Instead, it should feel like you're just hitting your bicep and that's it. Push, right? Pose on this next one. Boom. She stays there. Don't let me push you down. Right? And her delt should be rock solid right now. And she's got huge delts, so I can feel them. Right? All of this is strong, and she's supporting a little bit of a good chunk of my weight on top of that arm there. Right? Good structure to that strike. Okay, so let's go over the right uppercut now. Our final punch here, we're going to be going over the rear uppercut. So the rear uppercut, again, her back legs are right. We're going to stack that up against the wall as tight as we can, right? Not jammed up against it. Again, you can keep, a little bit of space so we feel like we're not just rubbing against it or leaning off of it. Just balancing between our legs as close to the wall as we possibly can. A little bit of bend to the knees because we want to feel our legs on these strikes, right? And she can, if she wants to, a very subtle load into her right side. We want to minimize that as much as possible. And if you don't need to do it, don't do it at all. It's so cool if we can just be sitting in our stance and bang, right? Throw a perfect uppercut without any fat on it whatsoever. So when Yazzie's in her stance here, her back foot, hip, shoulder is all going to turn. So it's like her shoulders are stacked up against the back of or her back is stacked up against the wall parallel to it again. She throws that right uppercut. Yes. Right, and she's balanced in her stance. She's not throwing her butt out. It should be stacked right underneath her shoulders, which is right over top of her legs. She is so balanced in this position, right? I should be able to touch her around a little bit, right? And she's not going to go anywhere quick. So she's standing in her stance, right? Subtle load to her right side. If she needs it, bending into those legs. And it's like your hip is drawing a U and pushing that elbow up and underneath the fist. Again, show us. Yes, just like that. Let's try that again. Pose her for me. Right, with their shoulders turned through, almost perfectly stacked behind the strike and following down the length of the wall as best as we can possibly make it, right, to maintain, right, the subtlety to it, right? Another thing, again, like I've already mentioned, don't pull the elbow behind the back before you throw it. It shouldn't feel like your arm is working independently of the rest of the body where you do something like this. Load, drop, and then turn back in. We're taking that drop completely out of the mix. Instead, it's just opening up, right? You can see, right, how easy it is to get underneath where I want to be hitting. If I was punching Yazzie in the chin right here with my uppercut, right, it doesn't take much. I'm already underneath it. I'm underneath it. Boom. Right, just like that. Instead of going like this. She's already seen that strike and it's not likely to land. Right, it's so subtle. Boom, that little pop right off. Same idea that we did before. She wraps underneath my forearm, hitting her bicep off of it. Look how tight and efficient that is. That is fucking awesome. Do that again. Boom, pose on this next one. Boom, don't let me push it down. All right, she needs to finish with structure. Look at that arm strong. Yeah, I can really put a lot of weight on it. You shouldn't feel like you're extending to push them away. You're just holding strong where you should be finishing. Couple more from me, yes? Good. All right, don't smack the butt. Yeah, exactly. It's hard not to want to throw your butt out with the technique. Right, go again. Yes, back. Good. One more. All right, super efficient right uppercuts here that teach us the mechanics for these techniques. Okay, so if you've been following along, there's a few points that you need to stay on top of whenever we're doing all of these techniques, right? I want to stay balanced on my legs the entire time. I don't want to feel my weight too far forward, too far back, too far to either side. I'm right over top of my legs no matter what's happening here. Our limbs are going to be what's transferring the power our body is creating into the target. Obviously, there's a little bit of that extra little snap that we can add to the end of it, but if we don't have structure at the finish, then something's going to break and we're going to lose all of the power that we're trying to create. So please try to remember that and use these drills, right? Remind yourselves, use them as a warm-up, do them on your own time. If you have a wall in your life, then you can do this. So again, we went over the jab. Boom, power coming from the step, turning it over, protracting the shoulder so it covers the chin and making sure that I finish tight and concise, sucking it back in, timing it with my lead foot. We have the cross, turning my back foot, making sure my shoulders get all the way through and maintaining structure through that strike, right? No bends, nothing weird, right? Stacked from fist into the back of my foot. We have our left hook, subtle load, opening up, finishing with my fist, elbow, shoulder, right? All in the exact same plane, right? And turn through, balanced on my legs. Again, we have the right hook, very subtle load, not whipping the arm open before I throw it in, keeping my elbow in, and it's just a subtle raise, turning myself through on that strike and sucking it right back in. Just like that. My left uppercut, loading, bending into the legs and scooping up as I turn my shoulders back in, making sure my elbow's right underneath my strike, finishing with strength in my shoulder and not overlifting my back arm, exposing the opposite side of my body. We have the right uppercut, turning my back foot through, finishing with all of my shoulders again stacked behind that strike. Lots of strength here and not letting it scoop off into the distance. Just splitting our opponent's guard with strength and then sucking it right back in. Boom. Also make sure not to swing the elbow back before you throw it, right? As tight as we can make it, right? Without exposing ourselves through these techniques. So that is the mechanics of our fundamental boxing: jab, cross, lead hook, lead uppercut, and rear uppercut. Make sure you try these drills and we'll see you next time. And thank you so much for helping, Yasmin.